They called her the Ghost of the Iron Ridge, a name whispered in fear across every mess hall and command center in the province. For 3 months, our best men had been hunted by a phantom that defied the laws of physics. She didn't just shoot, she erased people. No muzzle flash, no heat signature, and never a second shot because she never needed one. We were told she was a ruthless insurgent, a shadow sent by the enemy to break our resolve. But after 90 days of living in her crosshairs, I realized the military was lying to us. When I finally tracked her to a frozen cave at the roof of the world, I didn't find a terrorist. I found a face that had been scrubbed from every official record. A woman whose true identity didn't just stun the enemy, it threatened to burn down the entire Pentagon. My name is Elias Thorne, and this is the story of how the world's most lethal sniper became our only hope for survival. The air at 12,000 feet is a thief. It steals the heat from your skin, the moisture from your lungs, and eventually it steals your sanity. I adjusted the focus on my Steiner optics, the green-tinted world of the ridge shimmering through the heat haze of my own breath. Beside me, Sergeant Cale was so still he might as well have been carved from the mountain's granite. We had been lying in this particular crevice for 18 hours, buried under layers of snow-colored ghillie mesh and synthetic ice blankets. We weren't just hunting, we were becoming part of the landscape. In the special operations community, you hear a lot of tall tales. You hear about snipers who can hit a target from 3 miles out, or soldiers who can survive for weeks on nothing but rainwater and spite. But the Ghost was different. She wasn't a legend, she was a mathematical impossibility. In the last 60 days, she had claimed 42 confirmed kills. Every single one was a high-ranking officer or a lead tactician. She didn't target the privates, she didn't target the medics, she went for the brain of the operation, every single time. The brass back at base was losing their minds. They called it a statistical anomaly. I called it a professional at work. You don't get that kind of precision from a mountain rebel with a rusted AK-47. This was the work of someone who had been trained in the same rooms I had. Someone who knew our protocols, our movement patterns, and our weaknesses. "Captain," Kael's voice came through the bone conduction headset, barely a vibration against my skull. "Movement, 3 o'clock, high ledge, near the eagle's nest." I shifted my Barrett 50 cal with a slow, agonizingly deliberate movement. Even a centimeter of barrel flash could end our lives. I scanned the jagged peaks, my eyes stinging from the glare. For a moment, there was nothing but the shifting shadows of the clouds. Then, I saw it. It wasn't a person, it was a ripple in the atmosphere, like the shimmer of heat on a highway. It was a refractive cloak, expensive experimental technology that wasn't supposed to exist outside of a DARPA lab. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull thud-thud-thud that felt loud enough to trigger an avalanche. I held my breath, my finger hovering over the cold steel of the trigger. I had the Ghost in my sights. I could see the faint outline of a head, the tilt of a shoulder. But something was wrong. She wasn't looking at us. She was looking at the valley floor, where a massive supply convoy was currently winding its way through the pass. "Target acquired. Taking the shot on your count, Kael." "Wait," Kael hissed. "Look at her hands." I zoomed in, the high-powered lens bringing the Ghost's position into sharp relief. She wasn't holding a rifle. She was holding a laser designator. But she wasn't pointing it at the convoy. She was pointing it at the mountainside above the convoy, at a massive, unstable overhang of ice and rock. Before I could process what was happening, she triggered the device. A split second later, a hidden cache of explosives detonated on the ridge. A wall of white death, a massive manufactured avalanche roared down the slope. It didn't hit our convoy.
It hit an insurgent ambush team that had been lying in wait to wipe out our men. She had just saved an entire American platoon.
I froze. My training screamed at me to pull the trigger. My orders were clear: eliminate the ghost on sight. But my gut, the part of me that had survived 10 years in the bush, told me that I was looking at a friend, not a foe. "Captain, why aren't you firing?" Cale's voice was urgent now. "She's exposed! Take the shot!" "No," I said, my voice raspier than I intended. "She just saved the 3rd platoon. Look at the valley." As the dust settled, the ghost stood up. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She turned her head toward our position and raised the single hand, 2 fingers extended in a classic military scout signal: "Follow me." Then she stepped off the ledge, vanishing into a crevice that seemed to swallow her whole. We spent the next 6 hours tracking her through a labyrinth of caves that didn't appear on any of our satellite maps. These were old Soviet-era tunnels, reinforced with steel and hidden by decades of rockfall. The deeper we went, the more the air changed. It stopped smelling like frozen stone and started smelling like ozone, electronics, and lavender. We rounded a final corner, our weapon lights cutting through the darkness, and found ourselves in a massive subterranean chamber. It was filled with monitors, servers, and maps pinned to the walls with surgical precision. This wasn't an insurgent hideout. This was a command and control center. At the center of the room sat the ghost. Her rifle, a custom-built Chi-Tak M200 intervention, was leaned against a crate. She was sitting on a folding chair, her back to us. "Lower your weapons, Elias," she said, her voice a calm, melodic honey that hit me like a physical blow. "The sensors picked you up 3 miles ago. If I wanted you dead, you would have stayed on that ridge forever." I kept my rifle leveled, but my hands were shaking. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" She stood up slowly, her movements fluid and predatory. She reached up and unlatched the heavy ballistic mask that covered her face. As the mask fell, the dim light of the computer screens revealed a face I had seen in every history book at the academy. A face that was supposed to be 6 feet under in Arlington National Cemetery. It was Major Sarah Vance, the Valkyrie of the desert. The woman who had supposedly died in a helicopter crash 5 years ago after being betrayed by her own command. The woman who had been awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. "You're dead," I whispered, the world spinning around me. "I was at your funeral, Sarah. I saw the casket." She took a step toward me, a grim, battle-hardened smile touching her lips. "They buried a box of rocks in a lie, Elias. They tried to kill me because I found out where the money was really going. They thought the mountain would finish the job. They were wrong." She walked over to a map on the wall and pointed to a series of coordinates marked in red. "The people you're taking orders from aren't the good guys anymore. And the ghost? I'm not the one haunting this ridge. They are." In that moment, the mission changed. I wasn't a hunter anymore. I was a witness to a conspiracy that went all the way to the top, and the ghost sniper was the only one who knew how to stop it. The silence in the cavern was so heavy I could feel it in my marrow. I stared at Sarah Vance, the woman whose name was etched into the black granite of the memorial wall back home, and felt the foundations of my reality crumbling. She didn't look like a ghost. She looked like a survivor. Her skin was pale from years away from the sun, and the scar on her face was a jagged road map of a life that should have ended in fire and twisted metal. Beside me, Cale's rifle was still half raised, his knuckles white against the polymer grip. He was seeing a miracle. I was seeing a crime. Sarah didn't wait for us to recover. She turned back to the glowing monitors, her fingers dancing over a keyboard with a speed that suggested she had spent every waking hour of the last 5 years mastering this ghost tech.
The screens were a chaotic blur of thermal feeds, intercepted radio waves, and encrypted data streams. It was a nervous system for the entire mountain range. She was the brain, and the mountain was her body.
She began to speak, her voice devoid of emotion, like she was reciting a weather report rather than the story of her own execution. 5 years ago, the Valkyrie initiative wasn't about saving refugees, she said, her eyes fixed on a scrolling list of tail numbers and cargo manifests. We were told we were extracting high-value assets from a collapsing regime. But when we opened the crates in the back of those birds, it wasn't people, it was gold. Clean, unmarked bullion. And it wasn't going to the treasury. It was going to a private security firm called Black Horizon, a company founded by the very generals who gave us our orders. I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. Black Horizon was the primary contractor for the entire sector. They were the ones providing our intel, our logistics, and our enemy locations. Sarah looked over her shoulder, her green eyes piercing through the gloom. I was the lead pilot. I saw the coordinates. I saw the faces of the men receiving the payment. So they did what they always do with loose ends. They rigged the fuel line on my Chinook. I watched my entire crew burn alive in that valley, Elias. I crawled out of the wreckage with half my face melted and my lungs full of JP-8. I survived on snow and adrenaline until I found this place. She pointed to the largest screen, which showed a live satellite feed of a massive excavation site 3 valleys over. It looked like a standard mining operation, but the security perimeter was insane. SAM sites, drone swarms, and a full battalion of Black Horizon mercs. "This isn't a mine," she whispered. "It's a harvesting site. They're pulling something out of that mountain that makes gold look like pocket change. And they're using the ghost sniper as a cover story to keep regular military units like yours away from the area. Every time a commander gets too curious about the excavation, I get the order to eliminate them." I blinked, trying to process the scale of the betrayal. "You've been taking orders from them? From the people who tried to kill you?" A dark, hollow laugh escaped her lips. "No, Elias, I've been intercepting their orders. I kill the commanders who are on their payroll, the ones who are in on the deal. I let the honest ones live, like I did today. But the board is shifting. They're getting desperate. They know someone is leaking their manifests, and they've sent the shadow team to find the ghost. They aren't looking for a sniper anymore. They're looking for a witness." Suddenly, a series of red lights flashed across the consoles. A low-pitched alarm began to pulse, vibrating through the stone floor. Sarah's expression went from cold to lethal in a heartbeat. She grabbed her Chaytak and slammed a magazine home with a violent click. "They're here," she said. 2 minutes, maybe less. Cale finally found his voice. "Who's here? The insurgents?" "Black Horizon's elite," Sarah replied, already moving toward the cave entrance. "They don't use uniforms, they don't use rules, and they definitely don't take prisoners. If you want to live to see the sunrise, you do exactly what I say. No questions, no hesitation." She handed me a small, clear earpiece. "Plug this in. It's a localized mesh network. They can't jam it." Then she looked at Cale, her gaze softening for just a fraction of a second. "Sergeant, I suggest you find a very small hole to hide in. This is about to become a very loud room." We followed her out of the main chamber and into a series of narrow vertical vents. The temperature dropped instantly. I could hear the faint whine of high-altitude drones circling above, their sensors searching for any sign of heat. Sarah moved like she was made of shadow, her gray cloak making her invisible the moment she stopped moving. She led us to a hidden overlook that peered down into the valley we had just crossed. Through my night vision goggles, I saw them. 12 shadows emerging from the tree line. They didn't move like soldiers. They moved like predators. They were equipped with GPNVG-18 quad-eye tubes and suppressed rifles that cost more than my house. They were moving in a perfect tactical diamond, clearing the terrain with a cold, mechanical efficiency. Sarah knelt at the edge of the cliff, resting her rifle on a bipod that looked like it was part of the rock itself. She didn't look through the scope yet. She was feeling the wind, her fingers outstretched, sensing the subtle shifts in the mountain air. "Thorn," she whispered over the comms. "You see the man in the center? The one with the orange strobe on his helmet?" I dialed in my optics. "Yeah, I see him."
"That's Colonel Silas Vane," she said, her voice trembling with a rare flash of anger. "He was my commanding officer. He's the one who signed the order to sabotage my bird. He's here to finish what he started 5 years ago." I watched as Vane signaled his team. They were heading straight for the cave entrance. They had our tracks. They knew we were inside. I felt a surge of protective instinct, not for the mission, but for the truth. If Sarah died here, the truth died with her. We would just be more names on a memorial wall, victims of a tragic insurgent ambush. "I'm taking the lead, man," I said, shifting my rifle. "No," Sarah commanded, her voice like iron. "You don't fire until I tell you. We don't just want them dead, we want them terrified. In these mountains, fear is a force multiplier." She finally leaned into her rifle. The world went silent. I could hear her pulse over the mesh network, slow, rhythmic, and impossibly calm. She pulled the trigger. There was no boom. The suppressed Chaytak emitted only a soft hiss clap, the sound of a bullet breaking the sound barrier. A mile away, the man walking to the left of Vane didn't just fall, he disappeared. The .408 round struck him with such kinetic force that it threw his body 10 feet into the brush. The shadow team reacted instantly, diving for cover and throwing smoke grenades. But the smoke was useless against Sarah's thermal tracking optics. She fired again. Hiss clap. Another man, hidden behind a thick pine tree, slumped to the ground as the heavy round punched through the wood like it was paper. The enemy started blind firing into the ridges, their tracers lighting up the night like angry red hornets. But they were shooting at shadows. Sarah was already moving, sliding down a pre-rigged zipline to a position 50 yards away before they could even triangulate her first shot. This was the Ghost in action. It wasn't just about marksmanship, it was about geometry and psychological warfare. She was everywhere and nowhere. Every time they thought they had her cornered, a bullet would come from the opposite direction. One by one, the elite mercs were being dismantled.
Vane was screaming into his radio, his composure shattered. I could hear him through Sarah's intercept. "I know you're up there, Sarah," he roared, his voice echoing through the canyon. "You can't hide forever. We'll burn this entire mountain to the ground to find you." Sarah clicked her comms, her voice broadcasting directly into Vane's headset. "You didn't burn me 5 years ago, Silas. What makes you think you can do it now?" The look of pure, unadulterated terror on Vane's face as he realized who was hunting him was something I will never forget. He turned to run, but Sarah didn't kill him. Not yet. She shot the ground inches from his feet, the impact sending shards of frozen rock into his legs. He fell, howling in pain as his remaining men scrambled to protect him. "She's toying with them," Kyle whispered, his voice full of awe and horror. "She's not just killing them, she's breaking them." "We have to move," Sarah's voice crackled in my ear. "Their backup is 10 minutes out, and they're bringing gunships. If we aren't clear of this ridge by then, we're done." I looked at the chaos below, then back at the woman who had returned from the dead to fight a war no one knew existed. I realized then that my life as a soldier was over. I couldn't go back to the base. I couldn't go back to the lies. I was a ghost now, too. "Let's go," I said, grabbing my gear. "Lead the way, Major." She didn't say a word. She just turned and vanished into the fog, a shadow among shadows, leaving the ghost sniper legend behind and stepping into the light of a very real, very dangerous revolution. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy vibrations of distant rotors. We were moving fast now, deeper into the bowels of the Iron Ridge. Sarah Vance didn't run like a soldier burdened with gear. She flowed through the narrow rock chimneys and hidden crevices with a haunting, predatory grace. Every few hundred yards, she would stop, press her ear against the cold stone, and listen to the mountain. She wasn't just hiding, she was navigating a labyrinth she had spent 5 lonely years perfecting. "They're bringing in the vultures," Sarah whispered over the encrypted mesh net. "Black Horizon doesn't play by the rules of engagement. Those gunships carry thermobaric payloads. They don't want to capture us anymore. They want to turn this entire mountain into a kiln." Kale and I looked at each other. We were rangers, trained for the harshest conditions on Earth, but we were out of our depth. We were following a woman who had been erased from time, fighting an enemy that wore the same flag as us, but served a much darker master. "Why the extraction site?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the damp tunnel. "If they have all the gold and the power, why keep digging in a god-forsaken war zone?" Sarah stopped and turned, the dim light of her tactical tablet illuminating the sharp angles of her face. "Because it isn't gold they're finding, Elias. It's element 0, a rare Earth isotope that makes current nuclear technology look like a campfire. 1 gram of that stuff can power a city for a year, or a weapon that could level a continent. The military-industrial complex doesn't want to end this war. They need the war to stay exactly where it is, so they can keep mining in secret. Peace is bad for their profit margins." Before I could respond, the mountain groaned. A massive explosion rocked the earth above us, sending dust and small pebbles raining down from the ceiling. The Black Horizon gunships had arrived. They were blind firing into the cave entrances, hoping the pressure waves would collapse the tunnels. "We have to get to the comms array," Sarah commanded, her emerald eyes flashing with a renewed intensity. "If I can broadcast the footage I've gathered, the actual coordinates, the faces of the contractors, and the truth about the Valkyrie crash to the international press, their ghost sniper cover story dies, and so does their operation." We reached a vertical shaft that seemed to go up forever. A rusted metal ladder was bolted to the side, a relic from the old Soviet mining days. Sarah climbed first, her rifle slung across her back. I followed, my lungs burning as the oxygen grew even thinner. We were heading toward the highest point of the ridge, the Needle, where Sarah had hidden a high-gain satellite dish. As we emerged onto a narrow ledge near the summit, the world was a chaos of wind and fire. 2 blacked-out AH-64 Apache gunships were circling the peak below us, their 30mm cannons chewing through the rock face. They looked like giant, angry insects in the moonlight. "Kale, take the left flank! Elias, on me!" Sarah yelled over the roar of the wind. She dropped into a prone position at the very edge of the cliff. The wind was gusting at 40 knots, conditions that would make it impossible for any normal marksman to even hit a stationary target. But Sarah wasn't normal. She adjusted the dials on her CHATAC with a calm, mechanical rhythm. She wasn't fighting the wind, she was timing it. "Elias, I need you to lead the lead pilot of the first bird. I can't hit the cockpit and the sensor array at the same time," she said, her voice steady as a rock. I settled behind my Barrett 50 cal, the weight of the rifle grounding me against the gale. I lined up the crosshairs on the shimmering glass of the Apache's cockpit. My heart was a drum, but I forced my breathing to slow. In, out, half breath, hold. "On 3, Sarah whispered. 1, 2. The mountain erupted. We fired simultaneously. My heavy round shattered the reinforced canopy of the lead gunship, sending the pilot into a panicked bank. At the same instant, Sarah's .408 round found the tiny, vulnerable sensor ball beneath the nose of the helicopter. The Apache went blind, its sophisticated targeting systems fried in a cloud of sparks. The second gunship pivoted toward us, its wing stubs glowing as it prepared to launch a volley of Hydra rockets. "Jump!" Sarah screamed. We dove backward into a shallow trench just as the ridge exploded.
The heat was white-hot, the sound a physical blow that threatened to burst my eardrums. Shrapnel hissed over our heads like angry hornets. I looked up to see the needle, the peak where the comms array was hidden, partially collapsed. Sarah scrambled out of the dirt, her face covered in soot, but her eyes burning with a terrifying light. She didn't check for wounds. She didn't look back. She ran straight toward the wreckage of the comms dish, which was now hanging precariously over a 1,000-foot drop. "It's still active!" she shouted, pointing at a blinking green light on a portable hard drive. "I just need 60 seconds to bypass the encryption and hit send." But Black Horizon wasn't done. From the clouds above, a third silhouette appeared. Not a helicopter, but a high-altitude jump ship. 12 dark shapes detached from its hull, their black parachutes opening only seconds before they hit the ledge. These weren't mercs. These were the Black Watch, the personal shadow guard of the general Sarah had exposed. They landed in a perfect circle around us, their suppressed submachine guns leveled. At the center stood Colonel Silas Vane, his face twisted in a mask of pure, murderous hatred. He was limping from the shards Sarah had put in his leg earlier, but his eyes were fixed on the hard drive in Sarah's hand. "Give it to me, Sarah," Vane snarled, the wind whipping his voice into a jagged edge. "You've played the ghost for 5 years. It's time you finally stayed dead." Sarah didn't flinch. She stood on the very edge of the abyss, the hard drive held high. "The truth is already moving, Silas. You can kill us, but you can't kill the signal." She looked at me, a silent message passing between us. She wasn't going to give them the drive, and she wasn't going to let them take her alive. "Elias," she said, softly, her voice barely audible over the wind, "remember what you saw today. Tell the world that the ghost wasn't their enemy. The ghost was their conscience." And then, before Vane could pull the trigger, Sarah Vance did the unthinkable. She didn't fire her rifle. She didn't surrender. She smiled at the enemy who had stolen her life, stepped back into the void, and vanished into the white heart of the storm. The scream that tore from Colonel Vane's throat was lost in the roar of the mountain wind. He lunged toward the edge where Sarah had just stepped into the abyss, his fingers clawing at the empty, freezing air. But there was nothing. Only the swirling white mist and the distant haunting echo of the wind against the jagged rocks. For a heartbeat, the entire Blackwatch team stood frozen, stunned that their prize, the woman they had hunted for half a decade, had chosen the void over their cage. Cale and I didn't wait for them to recover. "Now!" I roared, swinging my Barrett into a horizontal arc. The heavy barrel slammed into the nearest soldier's chest with the force of a sledgehammer, sending him sprawling. Beside me, Cale went into a blur of close-quarters combat, his combat knife flashing in the moonlight as he neutralized 2 mercs before they could even raise their submachine guns. The ledge turned into a chaotic meat grinder of shadow and steel. Vane scrambled back, clutching his wounded leg, his face pale with a mix of fury and fear. "Kill them! Kill them both!" he shrieked, diving behind a fallen slab of granite. The Blackwatch were professionals, though. They recovered quickly, their suppressed weapons spitting silent tongues of flame into the dark. I felt a searing heat graze my shoulder as I dove behind the wreckage of the comms dish. Bullets sparked off the metal frame like angry fireflies. We were pinned down, outnumbered, and the only person who knew the way out had just jumped into a 1,000-foot grave. But then, I heard it, a faint rhythmic clicking over the mesh network earpiece Sarah had given me. Click, 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 click. It was Morse code. My heart skipped a beat. Sarah was alive! "Elias, look down," Cale whispered, his eyes wide behind his night vision goggles. I risked a glance over the edge. About 50 feet below the ledge, caught on a narrow outcropping that shouldn't have even been there, was a tattered gray cloak. Sarah hadn't jumped to her death. She had jumped to a preset extraction line she'd rigged months ago, a high-tension wire hidden by the perpetual fog of the needle. She was hanging there, her body pressed against the vertical rock, already working on a handheld terminal. "She's uploading,"
I realized. She's using the localized relay in her suit to bypass the destroyed dish. Vane heard me. He looked over the edge and saw the faint glow of Sarah's screen. A look of pure madness crossed his face. He grabbed a thermal grenade from his vest. If I can't have the data, nobody can. He prepped the grenade, his thumb hovering over the spoon. But before he could throw it, the mountain itself seemed to answer his treachery. A single, thunderous shot echoed from the valley floor, a sound so deep it felt like the earth's crust was cracking. It wasn't Sarah's rifle. It was something much bigger. A 20mm anti-material round punched through the very rock Vane was hiding behind, showering him in jagged stone splinters. From the darkness of the lower slopes, a secondary team emerged. They weren't wearing Black Horizon black. They were wearing the dusty, worn-out fatigues of the 3rd Platoon, the very men Sarah had saved from the avalanche earlier. They hadn't gone back to base. They had seen the ghost save their lives, and they had followed the smoke. They were regular soldiers who had finally realized who the real enemy was. "U.S. Army, drop your weapons!" A voice boomed over a megaphone from below. The Black Watch mercs hesitated. They were elite, but they weren't suicidal. They were surrounded by a company of angry rangers who now realized they had been used as pawns in a corporate mining war. In the confusion, I turned back to the cliff. Sarah was climbing back up, her movements slow and pained. I reached down, grabbing her hand and pulling her onto the ledge. She was covered in ice and blood, but she held the hard drive like it was a holy relic.
"Is it done?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked at the screen. A single word was blinking in green. Sent. "The signal is at the satellite," she whispered, her voice failing. "By morning, every major news outlet from London to Tokyo will have the coordinates of the Element Zero mine. The generals, they're done, Elias." Vane tried to stand, his eyes darting around like a trapped rat. "You think you've won? You're just a traitor, Sarah, a dead woman walking." Sarah walked toward him, her heavy boots crunching on the shale. She didn't raise her rifle. She just looked at him with those piercing emerald eyes, eyes that had seen the bottom of an abyss and come back. "I was dead the day you sabotaged my crew, Silas," she said quietly. "But the thing about ghosts is you can't kill them twice." She turned to me and Kyle. "The gunships will be back in force. We need to move. There's an old extraction tunnel 2 miles north. If we make it there, we can disappear before the official investigators arrive." "And you?" I asked. "Are you coming with us?" Sarah looked out over the mountains she had called home for 5 years. The first hint of dawn was beginning to bleed over the horizon, turning the peaks a soft, bloody pink. The ghost of Iron Ridge was no longer a mystery. She was a legend. "The world isn't ready for Sarah Vance to be alive yet," she said, pulling her ballistic mask back over her face. "But the ghost still has work to do. There are other mines, Elias, other lies buried in these hills. I'm not leaving until the mountain is clean." Before the 3rd Platoon could reach the summit, she vanished again, not into a cave, but into the very light of the rising sun. Kyle and I stood there, holding the evidence that would change the world, watching the spot where the most dangerous woman on Earth had just become its greatest guardian. The hunt was over. But for the ghost sniper, the war was just beginning. The victory on the Needle felt hollow as the sun fully crested the horizon. The hard drive was secure, and the signal was out, but the air still tasted like betrayal. While the 3rd Platoon rounded up the remaining Black Watch mercenaries, Call and I stood on the edge of the precipice, looking at the empty space where Sarah Vance had once again dissolved into the mist. We were heroes on paper, but in reality we were men without a country, caught between the military we swore to serve and the truth that threatened to destroy it. "We can't just let her stay out here, Captain," Call said, wiping a smear of grease and mountain dust from his forehead. "If she stays, they'll just send someone else, someone who doesn't hesitate like we did. They'll carpet bomb the entire ridge if they have to." I looked at the datapad in my hand. Sarah had left me one final gift before she vanished, a set of encrypted coordinates labeled Protocol 9. It wasn't a location in the mountains. It was an address in the heart of the city, a secure bunker hidden beneath a legitimate government building. She's not staying here to hide, Call, I realized, the weight of her plan finally hitting me. She's staying here to act as a decoy. She knows the High Command will obsess over catching the ghost while the data spreads through the world's servers. She's giving the truth time to breathe. Suddenly, my comms unit chirped. It wasn't the 3rd Platoon, and it wasn't Sarah. It was a high-priority encrypted channel from the Pentagon. The voice on the other end was cold, ancient, and devoid of any human warmth. It was General Holloway, the man who sat at the very top of the food chain. "Captain Thorne," the general said, his voice crackling with the distance. "We've seen the reports of the anomaly on the ridge. We understand you've encountered a rogue element. You are hereby ordered to destroy any data devices in your possession and eliminate the target known as the Ghost Sniper. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of treason. A transport is 5 minutes out to collect you. Choose wisely." The line went dead. Carl looked at me, his hand resting on his sidearm. "What's the move, Captain?" I looked at the 3rd Platoon soldiers. They were good men, young, idealistic, and currently being lied to. If I handed them the drive, they'd be executed. If I kept it, we'd be hunted. There was only one way to play this. "We're going rogue," I said. We didn't wait for the transport. We used the chaos of the cleanup to slip away, heading north toward the extraction tunnels Sarah had mentioned. The tunnel was a marvel of hidden engineering, a relic of the Cold War that had been retrofitted with modern sensors and supplies. As we entered the darkness, the heavy steel door hissed shut, sealing us off from the world we once knew. Inside, the walls were covered in Sarah's handwriting, detailed maps of every Black Horizon facility in the country, names of politicians on the take, and photographs of the Element Zero harvesting sites. But in the center of the room, there was a small framed photo. It was Sarah, years younger, standing in front of a flight school graduation class. She was smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "She wasn't always a ghost," a voice echoed from the shadows. I spun around, my rifle raised. Sarah emerged from the back of the tunnel, her ballistic mask hanging around her neck. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her gear. "I thought you said the world wasn't ready for you to be alive," I said, lowering my weapon. "It isn't, Elias," she replied, walking over to the map. "But the world is about to get a lot smaller. Holloway has authorized executive action on this entire sector. They aren't coming to arrest us, Elias. They're coming to erase us. They've launched a stealth bomber from the coast. It's carrying a tactical low-yield strike. They're going to blame the insurgents for a nuclear accident at the mine." The scale of their desperation was staggering. They were willing to kill thousands of their own people and poison a mountain range just to bury a ledger. "How long do we have?" Cale asked, his voice steady. 20 minutes, Sarah said, checking her watch. "But there's a way to stop the launch. The guidance system for the bomber is routed through the regional relay, the one I've been tapping into for years. If we can get back to the surface and override the signal, we can force the bird to ditch in the ocean." "But the surface is crawling with Blackwatch," I pointed out. Sarah picked up her Chaitak, the moonlight from a ventilation shaft reflecting off the long, lethal barrel. "Then we don't go as soldiers, we go as ghosts. They think they're the predators because they have the technology. They've forgotten that the mountain belongs to the one who knows how to listen to it." We moved back toward the light, 3 shadows against a world of fire. We weren't just fighting for our lives anymore, we were fighting to stop a massacre. The Ghost Sniper wasn't just a marksman anymore, she was the last line of defense between a corrupt empire and a catastrophic lie. As we reached the exit, the distant hum of a jet engine began to vibrate through the air. The clock was ticking. The sky above the Iron Ridge had turned a bruised electric purple. The high-altitude hum of the stealth bomber was no longer just a sound, it was a vibration that rattled our teeth and made the very stones beneath our boots shiver.
We were standing on the highest accessible ledge of the dead zone, a narrow strip of rock that hung over a drop so deep it seemed to touch the center of the earth. "The guidance relay is 500 meters up that spire," Sarah shouted over the rising gale. She pointed to a skeletal radio tower that jutted out from the peak like a needle. "If I can get a direct line of sight for 10 seconds, I can pulse the override code. But the moment I do, every sensor in the sky will lock onto my position. I'll be the brightest thing on their radar." "Then we make sure they're too busy to look," I replied, checking the remaining rounds in my barrette. Cale was already setting up a perimeter of remote-detonated claymores. This wasn't a stealth mission anymore. This was a last stand. From the clouds, the first wave of Blackwatch interceptors arrived. They didn't come in helicopters this time. They came in high-speed, silent-running VTOLs, dropping dozens of men directly onto our ridge. They knew the stakes. They weren't just fighting for a paycheck. They were fighting to keep their masters in power. "Go, Sarah!" I yelled, opening fire. The thunder of the .50 caliber rifle echoed across the canyon, a defiant roar against the coming storm. The first VTOL erupted in a ball of fire as my round found its fuel line. Sarah didn't look back. She began to climb the spire with a speed that seemed impossible. She was a shadow moving against the wind, her gray cloak whipping violently behind her. Below us, the ridge became a chaotic battlefield of tracers and explosions. Cale was a whirlwind of movement, his suppressed rifle taking down mercs as they tried to scale our position. "2 minutes to the strike!" Cale screamed, ducking as a rocket slammed into the rock face above us. I saw the stealth bomber now, a black triangular sliver cutting through the upper atmosphere. It was starting its final run. In seconds, it would release the payload that would erase Sarah, the evidence, and the lives of thousands in the valley below. Sarah reached the top of the tower. She was completely exposed, a lone figure silhouetted against the dawn. She didn't use her rifle. She pulled out a specialized laser uplink device and aimed it toward the sky. "I have the handshake!" Her voice crackled over the mesh net. "Initiating override! 10%! 20! "They're focusing on her!" Cale shouted. A group of Blackwatch snipers had set up on a neighboring peak, their green laser sights dancing across Sarah's back. I pivoted my rifle, my scope searching for the threats. I took out one, then another, but there were too many. One of the mercs fired. I saw the spark of the impact on the metal tower. Sarah flinched, her arm blooming with red, but she didn't drop the device. She didn't even move. 70%, 80. The stealth bomber opened its bay doors. I could see the lethal silver shape of the projectile beginning to drop. 90, 100, signal sent! High above us, the bomber's engines suddenly flared with a strange blue light. The projectile's internal guidance system went haywire, its fins spinning uncontrollably. Instead of dropping into the heart of the valley, the weapon veered sharply to the west, screaming toward the uninhabited ocean miles away. A moment later, a silent, blinding flash lit up the western horizon. Even from this distance, the shock wave hit us like a physical wall, nearly throwing me off the ledge. The threat was gone. The massacre had been averted, but we weren't safe yet. The Blackwatch mercs, seeing their mission fail, began to retreat toward their remaining transports. But they weren't leaving us behind. They were calling in a final airstrike on our specific coordinates to tie up the loose ends. "Sarah, get down from there!" I screamed. She slid down the tower, her face pale from blood loss, but her eyes shining with a strange, peaceful light. As she hit the ground, she handed me the hard drive. "It's over, Elias," she whispered. "The data is backed up on 7 different international servers. The override also triggered a dead man switch. Every secret Holloway ever had is currently being downloaded by every major news agency on the planet." The sound of the approaching jets grew louder. There was no way off this ridge in time. We looked at each other. 3 soldiers who had chosen the truth over their lives. "It was an honor, Major," Cale said, standing tall. Sarah looked at the rising sun, the golden light finally hitting her face, making the scar on her cheek look like a badge of honor. "We aren't dying today," she said, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "I told you, the ghost knows this mountain better than anyone." She kicked over a pile of loose shale, revealing a hidden trapdoor to an old high-speed mining rail system she had restored. "Jump, now!" As the ridge behind us was consumed by the fire of the final airstrike, we were already miles away, hurtling through the darkness of the mountain's heart. The world woke up that morning to a different reality. By noon, General Holloway and his associates were in custody. By evening, the Element Zero mines were under international transition, and the ghost sniper? The official report stated that she had perished in the final explosion on the Iron Ridge. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the high peaks, the soldiers stationed there still see a shimmer in the mist. They see a shadow that moves with a predator's grace and a guardian's heart. They know the truth. Sarah Vance isn't a hero because she died. She's a hero because she refused to stay dead while the truth was buried. The ghost is still out there, watching, waiting, and she never misses. If you found the truth behind the ghost sniper as stunning as the enemy did, don't let this story stay buried. Hit that like button to help us bypass the algorithm and spread the word. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the world's greatest military mysteries. What do you think really happened to Sarah Vance? Is she still out there watching the ridges? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Until next time, stay vigilant.